Hey everyone, it is Philip from PR Moves back again for our Week 2 Bears versus Bengals prediction. Now, quickly, before I start getting into the teams, if you are a fan of any other team in the NFL and you want to see what I think your team is going to perform like this week, go back to Wednesday's video, Week 2 predictions, and check that video out. That video is full of every other team's prediction, so you can really get a sense of what your team is going to be like, in my opinion, this season. If you're an Eagles fan, you want to see how your team does. If you are a Steelers fan, you want to see how I think your team does. That is the video to get that done. So we're going to be jumping into the Bears versus the Bengals. Now, first of all, it's going over their Week 1 performances. The Bears, of course, got humiliated on Sunday Night Football versus the Rams. Even though that game was relatively close until the fourth quarter, the Bears completely got ran on, passed on, everything in that game. The only positive parts of that game were how the offensive line and David Montgomery played, and even then the offensive line allowed 4 pressures and 2 sacks. So we'll get to them in a bit, but the Bengals went out and made a shocker. I picked them as a team that I thought was going to absolutely lose Week 1 to the Vikings. They had a pretty bad preseason. Their offseason was lackluster. Joe Burrow's coming off a catastrophic injury, and they go out and they upset. And I watched that entire game through to see what I can learn from this Bengals game, and of course I watched all the way through the Bears game because I'm a Bears fan. But, yeah, we're going to go through this Bengals versus Bears matchup. It feels like we're only we're the second game into the season, and it already feels like this is the most important game of the year for both of these teams. Bears need to prove that they can still contend for any sort of playoffs in the future, and the Bengals could be off to their first 2-0 starts since 2018. So this could be a really big game for both of these teams, and I'm excited to see how they can both perform. So we're going to jump in with the Bears receivers versus the Bengals secondary. And starting off with the Bears receivers, you know them, Allen Robinson, and I'll pull up the Allen Robinson pass chart that has been going around Bears social media. It was embarrassing how Matt Nagy utilized him last week. I think he knows that, and he has to do better there. Same with Mooney. Goodwin was our most efficient receiver. Same with Cole Kmet. Kmet and Goodwin were our 2 most efficient receivers. Montgomery was absolutely amazing. We know that. And overall, I mean, they just have to more properly utilize Darnell Mooney and Allen Robinson. Don't let Darnell Mooney go the way of Anthony Miller. He's so much more talented than Anthony Miller was at this point in his career. And Allen Robinson, a top 7 receiver in the league. You got to use him like a top 7 receiver in the league, not just curl routes and quick slants. Kmet was actually our best utilized receiver, and I'm expecting a big year so far. Just he had such a good game against one of the best defenses. Same with Montgomery, that those two could be the future of the year's offense. But then this Bengals secondary, they are going to be without Mike Hughes, who I believe they signed away from Minnesota last offseason. He's not expected to play. So their corner one's going to be former Dallas Cowboy Chibide Awuzie, who picked off Mitch Trubisky in the 2019 matchup between the Cowboys and the Bears, if you remember that game. Mike Hilton, I believe a former Steeler, is their corner number 2. And then Eli Apple, who's been a journeyman. He was on the Giants. I believe he was on the Saints. Not Chargers, but he ends up here on the Bengals, and he will be their corner number 3. And then their safeties, one of the best duos in the entire league, Von Bell, who they signed away in 2019, and Jesse Bates, who, even though he's not being given a contract extension, is still a dangerous safety, and he's still coming out to play every single day. Von Bell comes out and says, we're going to make that city ours. I hope that there's Bears receivers core takes that with pride, and they come out and play as hard as physically possible, and they make sure that they can defend this city. And that moves us on to the opposing secondary, the Bears secondary versus this super stacked Bengals receiving core. Starting out, Jamar Chase, what a performance after a subpar preseason. He came out and played absolutely outstanding. T. Higgins also played very well, made a few really good catches, including a touchdown catch. Tyler Boyd was pretty silent. I believe he only had 1 or 2 catches, but he can get going out of the slot. Knowing how bad our slot receivers are, I wouldn't be surprised if I'm playing Tyler Boyd in all my fantasy leagues this week, knowing how bad that our slot corner is. I already talked about Tyler Boyd. TJ Uzama and Drew Sample are the tight ends. They kind of are interchangeable. Drew Sample caught the huge overtime, basically game-winning catch last week, but Uzama was listed as their tight end 1. Just, it's notable to note Drew Sample is also a very competent tight end. And then Joe Mixon leads the league in rushing yards, 110 last week. I mean, this is the matchup of the best 2 running backs from week 1, which is really exciting. And then you look at our secondary, and probably the worst secondary in the league outside of Jalen Johnson. Kindle Vildor was okay, but he looked like a 5th round pick out of Georgia Southern. That's in his first ever week 1 start against a top 5 offense last week. He was okay. Marquis Christian was the worst corner in the league last year. He let nearly 6 or 7 receptions for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns past him. That can't happen. Eddie Jackson, absolutely embarrassing performance. He missed like 3 tackles. He did make 1 or 2 good plays. I will say that. When down in the red zone, he did make 1 or 2 good plays, but he was absolutely terrible. Missed the tackle on Van Jefferson early in that game, and then same with Deshaun Gibson, who also missed that same tackle, who I would say was just as bad as Eddie Jackson in coverage last week. And really, the Bengals receivers should absolutely dismantle this Bears secondary. It really shouldn't even be close. I expect a big day passing for Joe Burrow. If it wasn't for this Bears front 7 versus the Bengals offensive line, this Bengals offensive line is headlined by Jonah Williams, their 2019 first-round draft pick, who missed all of 2019, came back, played some of 2020 before getting hurt again, but he's playing his first full season hopefully this year. Quentin Spain, who I advocated for the Bears to trade for in the middle of last year, the Bengals made that trade, and he's currently starting at left guard. Trey Hopkins is the center. The best player on this offensive line, at least last week, was Riley Reif, who will be going up against Khalil Mack. Mack knows Riley Reif very well from when Reif was in Minnesota. And pretty much Xavier Su'a-Filo and Jackson Carman, I don't know who's going to be starting. ESPN has Su'a-Filo as the starter, so that's who I'm rolling with. But again, this is not a very impressive offensive line. They're a bottom 5 offensive line in the league. Riley Reif was their only grade, I believe, like over an 80 for PFF last week. And then this Bears front 7 got 3 pressures and a sack against Matthew Stafford. I said that our front 7 had a chance, but Robert Quinn played better than Khalil Mack. That's all I can really say. Mack didn't play well. Roquan was really good at stopping the run and stopping short passes and everything that the offensive line would actually be good at. Roquan struggled last week on play action. He bit on play action every time, led to him getting beat in coverage. But overall, Eddie Goldman looks like he's not going to play. He's doubtful. If he doesn't play, then that will be Angelo Blackson or Krias Tonga. But still, I don't think that really makes a difference. I don't think it makes that much of a difference. I think our run defense will be slightly worse, but I think against this offensive line, our run defense should be able to contain Mixon. He will get a few runs off, just like the Rams did last week, but it should not be an absolute shootout like some people would expect. And that brings us to the other front 7 versus our offensive line. Now, I did make the introspective call, and I put Elijah Wilkinson at left tackle. He filled in there at the end of the Rams game, and I think that he's probably going to get the start with both Peters and Larry Borum, who was just put on short-term IR, I believe, questionable for this game. So, again, Cody Whitehair, I think, was our worst offensive lineman last week. James Daniels played amazing in the run and the pass last week. Jermaine Ifedi looked way better than he did in the preseason. And Sam Mustipher was really good in the pass. He was not as good as a run blocker, but he was not as good but he was way better in pass coverage. So that's good to see. I think our offensive line will be an average unit in the league this year. Daniels, Whitehair, Mustipher, and whoever's our left tackle are pretty good. And Ifedi played well last week, so I can't sit there and completely hate on him. But this Bengals front 7 is low-key underrated, so we got to watch out for them. I think they have as much depth as the Rams. They just don't have Aaron Donald, but they're pretty close. Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson. Trey Hendrickson was a nightmare last year when we played the Saints. Hubbard has been solid his entire career. He's dealt with injuries. Up the middle, DJ Reader and Larry Ogunjobi played amazing against Dalvin Cook and the Vikings. But we played really well against Joseph Day and Donald last week against the Rams. So even though both those guys are good, and I'm definitely not moving them out, I think that they can play amazingly. I do think our offensive line can handle for the most part. And then Jermaine Pratt had an absolutely amazing game against the Vikings as well. Logan Wilson had a very nice game. Akeem Davis Gaither, or David Gaither? I don't know. I'm sorry. I think it's Akeem Davis Gaither. I think I spelled it wrong. But he also was solid. Definitely did not see the field as much with Pratt and Wilson out there, but Davis Gaither is still a very good player in his own right. But considering how our offensive line played last week against the best defensive line in football, or at least it was last year, I'm going to go out and say that our offensive line is going to be pretty successful this week. If they're somehow worse, then that's just more reason to judge our coaching. So I will go out and say that the Bears offensive line will be pretty good in this performance. And that brings us to our overall prediction, which you guys saw back on Wednesday, what I thought the Bears would win, 24-23. I do think this is the first game of the year that I have the Bears winning. Looking at it, I do think Joe Burrow, very similarly to the Vikings game, is like 18 for 23 for 240 yards and 2 touchdowns. Joe Mixon, I think, has a nice game on the ground. I think Jamar Chase, or whoever lines up in the slot, I just have this being Jamar Chase, absolutely feasts. I don't trust Marquise Christian at all. Trey Hendrickson, I do have getting a sack. And Jesse Bates, I have getting an INT. I forgot to put that on Andy Dalton's stat line, but I do think Jesse Bates comes in and gets an INT. Andy Dalton, I do have him getting his revenge, 230 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. Montgomery's going to go out and grab 90 yards and a touchdown. He's going to continue to play well. Robinson, I think he finally gets in the end zone. Kmet, I think he catches the other touchdown. I do have Mack and Roquan also combining for a sack down there. But I do have the Bears going out and getting their first win of the season at home against the Bengals. We were 3-5 in Soldier Field last year. I hope we can have a much better record at home with fans in attendance. If you're going to the game tomorrow and you see this video, be loud. Make sure the players can hear you. And leave a like on this video and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.